Can I remind members, please, that social distancing measures are in place in the chamber and right across the campus. I'd ask that members take care to observe these measures carefully over the course of this afternoon's business, including when entering and exiting the chamber. And the first item of business this afternoon is portfolio questions, and the first portfolio is finance. Can I remind members that questions 1 and 8 are grouped together? Could I ask members to stop having private conversations, please? Remind them that questions 1 and 8 are grouped together and that questions 3 and 4 are grouped together. We therefore move to question 1, and it's Ian Gray.
Thank you. Scottish Government, what funding the Finance Secretary will allocate to supporting workers in the longer term once the furlough scheme ends?
Kate Forbes is joining us remotely. Cabinet Secretary.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. Can I say at the outset that I'm disappointed that the Chancellor is not extending the furlough scheme beyond the 31st of October, despite our repeated representations to the UK Government. Of course, he still has the option to do so, and I don't believe the £1,000 job retention bonus in January 2021 will provide enough support for many workers and businesses. In Scotland, however, we have already started to act quickly to put in place a business support package worth more than £2.3 billion, and we have also announced the decision to invest £100 million to support those that find themselves unemployed, on top of the £33 million that has already been committed for employability support this year.
Ian Gray.
Well, I share the Minister's disappointment that the Chancellor won't extend the furlough scheme. But nonetheless, we really have to do much more. In my own constituency of East Lothian, for example, we face a hospitality industry unemployment crisis if we don't increase the support. If the furlough scheme ends before a full quality jobs guarantee scheme is in place, thousands of workers in restaurants, bars and cafes could be laid off. The sector directly employs almost 3,500 people in my constituency alone. So will the Minister commit to releasing the finance for a fully funded jobs guarantee scheme?
Kate Forbes.
Well, I have already worked with Fiona Hislop, the Cabinet Secretary for Fair Work, to release funding to provide support, particularly to young people, but right across the workforce. We've refreshed our youth employment strategy, the Developing the Young Workforce, and we're also working with Sandy Begbie, who is leading activity on the job guarantee, to ensure that the £50 million that has been set aside for the job guarantee is put in place quickly and ensures that there is a job guarantee for young people as advised by the Economic Advisory Group's report.
Question number 8 is from Stuart Stevenson, who is also joining us remotely. Stuart Stevenson.
To ask the Scottish Government what funding the Finance Secretary will allocate to support people who are looking for work or at risk of redundancy as a result of COVID-19.
Kate Forbes.
Well, like I said in the earlier question, we will continue to make this case that the furlough scheme should not end. But rather than wait for the Chancellor to change his mind, we have already confirmed investment totalling £133 million in this financial year to support people towards and into work as we gradually restart the economy. And that funding will help people access or progress into work, as well as supporting those that are at risk of redundancy. And that is in addition to the £214 million that has already been allocated to Skills Development Scotland this year, to work with partners and employers to ensure that every individual has the skills and the confidence to get a job. We are in no doubt about the challenges facing people up and down the country, and that's why we've moved quickly to put that funding in place.
Stuart Stevenson.
Thank you, Cabinet Secretary, for that and for the very substantial sums of money to which you've been referring. I think it's particularly important that young people are supported. But does the Cabinet Secretary agree that creating and protecting jobs generally will only be possible in true partnership with the business community, trade unions, enterprise agencies and the third sector.
Kate Forbes.
I do agree with that. Throughout the pandemic, we have worked collaboratively with businesses, with trade unions, the enterprise agencies and charities. And as we move into recovery, it has got to have a focus on jobs. We have engaged extensively with businesses over the past few months, and we've discussed ideas and views on economic recovery with many organisations and individuals. And that approach underlines our willingness to listen and then collaborate with businesses. In fact, with those that create the jobs in the first place. And we know that it's their innovation and their determination that will be the engine room of our economic recovery. So the finance I've announced is about working through these organisations to create and to retain the jobs.
I have two supplementary requests. Jackie Bailey, followed by John Mason. Jackie Bailey.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. The tourism industry accounts for a significant part of the local and the Scottish economy, and many of my constituents that work in the Loch Lomond area are worried that they will not see a proper recovery until March next year. So in the absence of the UK continuing the furlough scheme, will the Cabinet Secretary do something on a sector-specific basis to protect jobs in the tourism industry?
Kate Forbes.
The short answer is yes, because like Jackie Bailey, I have a constituency where many businesses rely on tourism and are facing real challenges right now. The 3 points I'd make quickly is, of course, the Tourism Action Group has been meeting regularly to look at sector-related support. The second one would be we have most recently announced additional support, for example, towards hotels to recover and to protect jobs. And the third point is the information that I've already shared around the youth guarantee and around the substantial sums of money that we've put in place in order to ensure that young people in particular have the option to train or to get a job, and we'll work with employers, including in the tourism industry, so that they can access that support and keep people employed even when trading conditions are so challenging.
John Mason.
Thank you. I mean, if it seems to be the case the UK government does not understand the Scottish economy and particularly sectors like tourism, would it not be better if the UK government gave more powers to the Scottish Parliament and the Scottish Government to deal with that?
Kate Forbes.
Well, I agree with John Mason. That's the bottom line. We will continue with our partners, businesses and others, make the case for the extension of the furlough scheme, because I am extremely concerned about the cliff edge in October. And we know that businesses and workers will continue to need support well beyond October, whether it's in the tourism industry or other industries. And you see that as being particularly important when it comes to local lockdowns, such as in Aberdeen, Manchester or Leicester. And I will work with the UK government on a four nations solutions, but if they don't ensure that relevant support remains in place to protect jobs, then we need to have the funding or the fiscal flexibilities to do something similar. But in the absence of borrowing powers, we are overly reliant on the UK government's consequentials.
Question number 2, Bob Doris.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. To ask the Scottish Government what assessment has been made of the financial pressures facing local authorities as they seek to reopen leisure and community facilities.
Ben McPherson.
Since the 23rd of March, we have been working closely with Community Leisure UK Scotland and Vocal Scotland to both understand the financial implications on local authority leisure provision, but also the community impact caused by COVID-19. We have also engaged extensively with UK Active, the body representing private gym operators. Community Leisure UK Scotland and Vocal, supported by COSLA, have been undertaking detailed analysis relating to the financial impact of COVID-19 and estimate that the deficit for the local authority leisure sector will be £127 million at the end of the calendar year.
Bob Doris.
I thank the Minister for that sobering answer. Glasgow Life are clear financial challenges. They're a key driver in the delay in reopening much of its sports and community estate. And I was pleased that the First Minister confirmed to me that the Scottish Government is working with COSLA to see how the Scottish Government can support councils in this area. Can I ask that during those discussions that there's an examination about how any financial support or partnership financial package will give focus on reopening facilities in deprived areas, in deprived communities such as in my constituency at Petershill's Complex, John Paul Academy and Maryhill Community Centre.
Ben McPherson.
I thank Bob Doris for that supplementary, and as mentioned in my first answer, we are aware of the impacts of COVID-19 on local authority culture and leisure services, and we recognise the importance of local authority leisure provision and that communities, like in the places in Bob Doris's constituency that he mentioned, will need access to these services as we recover from the pandemic, and especially those communities that have been disproportionately impacted by COVID-19. We also appreciate that Glasgow Life are facing a challenging financial position and are making tough decisions. We and Sport Scotland are in dialogue with Glasgow Life to understand the impact of closures and their specific circumstances in supporting community sport to mitigate the impact of COVID-19. And we'd be happy to provide Bob Doris with an update in writing in due course if that would be helpful.
Question number 3, Alexander Stewart.
You, Presiding Officer, to ask the Scottish Government what its position is on the additional UK Government funding to support Scotland's people and businesses through the COVID-19 outbreak.
Kate Forbes.
Well, my position is to very much welcome the recent UK Government announcement that Barnett consequentials will not fall below £6.5 billion, and every penny, I can assure the Chamber, every penny will be used for the COVID response. However, I am disappointed that the proportionate and reasonable requests on fiscal flexibilities that I've been making and which this Parliament has supported have been dismissed by the UK Government. It's not yet clear what level of additional funding will be required to deal with the exceptional circumstances we face as this situation continues to develop through the financial year, and I'll need to continue to engage closely on that with the Parliament and the UK Government.
Alexander Stewart.
I thank the Cabinet Secretary for that response. A cautious estimate of UK Government spending to help Scotland through this difficult period would be £15 billion. That's our share of UK schemes such as furlough, the Self-Employed Support Scheme, the Chancellor's Plan for Jobs, business loans, benefit increases and extra cash for the Scottish budget. Therefore, does the Cabinet Secretary agree with the words of our own official quoted in a recent FOI release, who said, "My view would be that Scotland receives a fair share of UK Treasury spending"?
Kate Forbes.
Well, of course, this funding is just the nature of where the borrowing powers lie. We cannot borrow. Therefore, the UK Government has borrowed in order to allocate funding to Scotland, and I would absolutely expect us to get our fair share. But the point remains that the COVID emergency, whether that's in the health service or in the economy, requires unprecedented support, and we have to respond with one arm tied behind our back because we're dependent on policy choices and consequentials that come from the UK Government. Now, Conservative members frequently ask me to increase spending, and I'm sure they will over the course of the next few questions, increase spending in different areas. And I have to say that because we cannot borrow, we cannot create the headroom to therefore accommodate those requests. And that's precisely why we're asking for very simple, very straightforward flexibilities and powers in order to do it more responsibly.
Question number 4, Gil Patterson.
Many thanks, Presiding Officer. To ask the Scottish Government what recent discussions the Finance Secretary has had with the UK Government regarding the financial response to the COVID-19 pandemic.
Kate Forbes.
Well, I've engaged closely with UK Government ministers throughout the COVID-19 outbreak. The immediate steps taken by the UK Government to support businesses and workers was welcome. But most recently, I met the Chief Secretary to the Treasury on the 24th of July when he was visiting Edinburgh, and I again raised the need for greater fiscal flexibilities to enable us to properly manage the impact of the crisis. And I imagine that future constructive engagement will be required in order to make progress on that issue.
Gil Patterson.
Can I thank the Cabinet Secretary for that answer, and can I also declare an interest, since this part of my question will be related to furlough, and of course the business that I own that my son presently runs has benefited from furlough. Cabinet Secretary, there is no doubt that the furlough scheme has been essential and beneficial to business. However, I believe it needs extended. Otherwise, some of the good work, very good work indeed, already done by furlough may be wasted. The economy, I believe, with our experience, is recovering slowly, but businesses are still struggling and need more time and assistance, particularly the many businesses in sectors that have not had any help apart from furlough. Will the Scottish Government raise this with the UK Government with the view to extend furlough and provide more direct support to help business in the short term until their economy recovers that bit more?
Kate Forbes.
Well, can I say at the outset how mindful I am of how challenging it has been for countless businesses, the length and breadth of the country in so many different sectors, and that the initial funding provided could never have replaced the lost income from this period of lockdown. In terms of providing additional funding, we will continue to use all of our resources and all the powers at our disposal to move quickly to support businesses. We have exceeded the consequentials provided for business support and have to balance affordability within a fixed budget. But I'm very happy to continue to make the case for additional resource to provide support for those businesses that Gill Patterson mentions. And where we can, we will absolutely put support in place, like we did most recently with the Hotel Recovery Programme.
Questions 3 and 4 were grouped together, and I have 2 supplementaries. Willie Rennie, followed by Bill Kidd. Willie Rennie.
The Cabinet Secretary knows that I'm a supporter of a universal basic income. So in the discussions with the Chancellor, can she tell us what progress she's making on implementing this policy that her government claims to support?
Kate Forbes.
I think the short answer is, in those conversations, very little progress. I think we've, whilst making the case and raising it through all sorts of different means, not just through my own conversations, but also my colleagues' conversations as well, it's very much a brick wall, and I don't see any progress being made through those conversations. We'll continue to make the case, but I think it's clear that in order to make universal basic income a success, you need to have full control over welfare powers, and that is something that we don't have as yet.
Bill Kidd.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. Cabinet Secretary, countries around the world are increasing spending this year to deal with the impacts of COVID, when they're able to do so because they have borrowing powers. Do you agree that this is disappointing that the UK Government is yet to hand over this power, and it gives the flexibility to the Scottish Government for helping to manage the problems that we're having at the moment?
Kate Forbes.
Well, Bill Kidd is right to say that countries around the world are using borrowing powers. The UK Government intends to borrow well over £300 billion to finance its response to the pandemic. And that's right, and we value the funding that has come from that. However, it's unfortunate that it hasn't been prepared to grant the Scottish Government just a temporary £500 million pound borrowing facility. That is around 1/600th of their own borrowing level. So it's pretty small in the grand scheme of things. And the proposals that I've outlined to the UK Government would have simply substituted a redundant borrowing power for a more meaningful spending power, and therefore leads me to conclude that it has been a political decision to deny us borrowing powers rather than a financial or a technical decision.
Question number 5 is from Edward Mountain, who is joining us remotely. I hope. Edward Mountain.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. Thank you, Presiding Officer. I have activated my own camera and microphone. So, to ask the Scottish Government what additional funding the Finance Secretary has made available to allow schools to return from the 11th of August.
Ben McPherson.
The Scottish Government has committed up to a further £135 million over the next 2 years to support the reopening of schools. We are investing £80 million in providing approximately 1,400 additional teachers and 200 extra support staff to tackle any loss of learning, up to £50 million in costs associated with the reopening of schools, £3 million in youth work and £2 million to the family learning element of the promise. This is in addition to investing £25 million to support digital inclusion and a further £12.6 million for local authorities to continue the provision of free school meals throughout the summer holidays this year.
Edward Mountain.
And I thank the Minister for that response. Minister, I've been contacted by a group representing 60 recently qualified teachers who have all completed their probationary and training within the Highlands, who are currently on 0-hour contracts with the Highland Council. They could play a pivotal role in delivering the safe education that our youngsters need. Can the Minister give the Highlands an undertaking that some of the funding that he has just mentioned will be available to make these teachers have the ability to have permanent contracts within our region to allow them to play the pivotal role in teaching our children that they want to play?
Ben McPherson.
I thank Mr Mountain for his supplementary. However, these decisions concerning recruitment in the specifics for which he details would be decisions for local authorities to undertake. However, if Mr Mountain would like to write probably in the first instance to the Cabinet Secretary for Education and certainly copy that correspondence to me, we can look at the detail and see if there's any assistance that could potentially be provided. But I think in the first instance, this is a matter for the local authority.
Question number 6, and joining us remotely, Mark Ruskell.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. To ask the Scottish Government what funding the Finance Secretary will make available to prepare for the possibility of a no-deal Brexit, including to the NHS.
Kate Forbes.
Well, the Scottish Government continues to prepare for the consequences of EU exit, but I do need to be clear that we'll not be able to mitigate all of the impacts completely. We also face pressures and uncertainties due to the COVID-19 outbreak, but we're working closely with other UK governments and with the public, private and third sectors in Scotland to ensure that we are all as prepared as possible for all Brexit outcomes.
Mark Ruskell.
I thank the Cabinet Secretary for that response. On the 3rd of August, the UK Government wrote to medicine suppliers, asking them to prepare for the end of the transition period and to make stockpiling a key part of contingency plans. Can the Cabinet Secretary clarify whether additional funding will be allocated to NHS Scotland, stockpiling these essential supplies ahead of the potential chaos of a no-deal Brexit?
Kate Forbes.
Well, I would expect the UK Government to provide funding for the impact of Brexit on Scotland's public sector services and on the impact on the economy as well. In terms of the specifics, I'm unaware right now whether the announcement he references came with Barnett consequentials, so I would need to get back to him on the precise details. But in general, we believe that right now there isn't sufficient funding being allocated with these requests and these policy decisions in order to help us mitigate all of the impacts.
Supplementary from Emma Harper.
While today's announcement of the lifting of American tariffs on Scottish shortbread is welcome good news for the shortbread makers, the Scottish whisky industry is still paying a £200 million price for tariffs on single malt exports to the USA. Can the Cabinet Secretary therefore provide an update on what steps the UK Government has taken to have these crippling tariffs lifted on our iconic and financially critical whisky sector?
Kate Forbes.
Well, it's for the UK Government to explain its actions to support our whisky industry, which is so important to Scotland's economy. And it's clear that Scottish businesses are being hit hard by these tariffs, and jobs and livelihoods are all at risk. UK ministers must, at the very least, step up engagement with their US counterparts as a matter of urgency. And at the very least, they must put getting these damaging tariffs removed from key Scottish produce ahead of securing any UK-US trade deal. And having left the EU, The UK government will have the trade powers it wanted. Now it must use them and demonstrates that it supports Scottish produce.
And question number 7, Finlay Carson.
To ask the Scottish Government what further measures the Finance Secretary will introduce to help businesses recover from the COVID-19 crisis.
Kate Forbes.
Well, as Finlay Carson will know, we've already put in place substantial support, £2.3 billion to support business, and examples of how that support has benefited business includes the £38 million for early stage businesses, £11 million for the self-employed, and nearly £1 billion in business grants and rates relief. And I'm sure that further economic policy measures will feature in the programme for government. We recognise the need for additional interventions to support economic recovery. And as I said to one of Finlay Carson's colleagues earlier today, the way to do that is to ensure that we've got the funding that can then be passed on. There are many calls on funding this year, the health service, business support, transport services and local government. We will use the funding we have, get out the door as quickly as possible for those businesses, but ultimately we are reliant on consequentials coming to us.
Finlay Carson.
I thank the Cabinet Secretary for a response. She will know that the Office of the Chief Economic Advisor has been undertaking work to assess the regional impacts of the pandemic. It's expected that Dumfries and Galloway and the Scottish Borders will be the two councils which have experienced the greatest impact. And there's still many businesses such as beauticians, gyms, driving instructors, family-run retail and more who have not only been subject to delayed restart, but for a number of reasons have not been eligible for grant funding from either the council or enterprise agency. Does the Cabinet Secretary recognise that there would be a significant benefit in a discretionary fund potentially being applied in special cases where businesses have to date not been funded by existing schemes? And given that Dumfries and Galloway, the business grant scheme has a remaining balance of over £7.5 million, will the Cabinet Secretary, as a matter of urgency, consider introducing a discretionary grant scheme which will allow local authorities and enterprise agencies in my constituency to assess claims and provide support on a case-by-case basis?
Kate Forbes.
Well, can I quickly address the point about any underspend? It's worth saying that in order to ensure that money wasn't sitting in those funds and not being used, we have already redeployed much of that funding through the Pivotal Resilience Fund and the Hardship Scheme, which of course are unique to Scotland. But I take his wider point that businesses are still in need of additional support. And I go back to what I said earlier, whilst not disagreeing with him, asking him where he thinks that money should come from in order to provide that support to businesses. Because we, by law, have got to have a fixed budget. Therefore, when it comes to revenue, any additional funding to businesses must come from either the health service, the transport system, local government or elsewhere. Every other government around the world is funding these important interventions through borrowing. Our primary source of income is the UK government. So either we need additional funding or we need the powers in order to get the support to support his constituents. And that's why I would ask the Conservatives and Finlay Carson to join us in backing those calls.
And a short supplementary, please, Kenneth Gibson.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. On islands, hospitality and tourism businesses are particularly vulnerable. Islands already receive Special Islands Needs Allowance to help with the provision of public services. Will the Cabinet Secretary establish an Islands Fund to assist the private sector, particularly tourism and hospitality? And she asked where the money should come from with regard to the previous question. As I've suggested on a number of occasions, I think it's about time we scrapped the kind of rates relief on our large supermarkets, which have made a substantial profit out of the current pandemic and are making millions of pounds in rates relief. That money could go towards assisting our businesses.
Kate Forbes.
Well, as a representative of island communities, I understand the question and the importance of ensuring that there is support for our island communities. Many of the businesses in our island communities benefited from the hardship scheme as well as the local authority grants. And therefore, going forward, whilst we're unlikely to again take a blanket approach, we will continue to look at where we can use any of the funds that we have to provide support. But at the moment, the focus is very much on jobs and how we ensure, particularly young people, that everybody who's facing unemployment is able to get a job or a training opportunity.
That concludes portfolio questions and finance, and we'll now move on to questions on environment, climate change and land reform. And we go to question number 1. Oh, just before that, can I remind all members entering and leaving the chamber to make sure you maintain social distancing? Thank you. We now move to question 1, and Maureen Watt, who's joining us remotely.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. To ask the Scottish Government what recent discussions it's had with the UK Government regarding environmental issues.
Rosanna Cunningham.
Scottish ministers have regular contact with the UK Government with regards to environmental issues. With the Cabinet Secretary for the Rural Economy and Tourism and the Minister for the Natural Environment, I participate in monthly four-nation interministerial meetings where environmental issues are discussed. Communiques regarding past interministerial group for the Environment, Food and Rural Affairs meetings can be found on the Scottish Government's website.
Maureen Watt.
I thank the Cabinet Secretary for that answer. I understand that the Westminster Government intends to publish an energy white paper in September. According to Scottish Renewables, Scotland has the potential of infinitely more renewable resource than it will need. Is it not imperative, therefore, that the Scottish Government has maximum input into this strategy and is dealt with as an equal partner in this if England is to meet its obligations on climate change? And is the Cabinet Secretary in favour of a renewables fund for Scotland?
Rosanna Cunningham.
As the Committee on Climate Change has previously noted, our ability to deliver a green recovery in Scotland will rely heavily on willingness and action from the UK Government, given the substantial responsibilities and regulatory controls that remain reserved. And the member is correct to point out that the other side of that coin is that the UK Government requires us to achieve our targets if they are to achieve theirs. The long overdue Energy White Paper will obviously be relevant to the energy system's role and ability to move us towards net zero. However, until we see the details, we will not know the extent to which its proposals are in tune with Scotland's distinct energy priorities and targets. Successive UK governments have squandered Scotland's oil and gas resources, and this must not be allowed to happen again with regards to Scotland's renewable resources. In any discussions with UK government, we will seek to ensure that the people of Scotland reap the full benefits of our natural resources and will consider all options on how to achieve that, which may include a renewables fund.
Question number 2 is James Kelly.
Thank you, Deputy Presiding Officer. To ask the Scottish Government whether it will provide an update on what action has been taken to tackle fly tipping.
Rosanna Cunningham. Terribly sorry. I should take my glasses off so that I can see. Mary Gushel.
Thank you. Fly tipping is, of course, illegal, it's dangerous and completely unnecessary. And responsibility for dealing with litter and fly tipping rests with local authorities. We've already developed with Zero Waste Scotland and COSLA and local authorities a national waste management marketing campaign that sets out how the public can manage waste responsibly during this difficult time. And this also includes messaging on fly tipping. And the National Litter Strategy, which includes measures on fly tipping, is coming to the end of its 5-year lifespan, and we're currently considering how best to take that forward and to take forward a review of policy in that area.
James Kelly.
I thank the Minister for the answer. Sadly, fly tipping is a scourge on many local communities, with areas like the Clyde Walkway, people dispersing litter and a really kind of sight that people enjoy for walks and leisure. I want to commend the Rutherglen Reformer for the work they are doing to campaign against fly tipping, and can I ask the Minister what action has been taken to review powers and resources that are available to local councils to ensure that they've got an adequate toolkit available to discourage and penalise fly tippers?
Mary Gushel.
I would completely agree with what James Kelly has stated there, because I think we've all seen it in our own communities, what seems like a massive increase in the rates of fly tipping. But I think one thing that we really need to get a handle on is just how massive and how wide a problem that may be. And that's where I would encourage all local authorities to use those litter mapping services that we have, so that we can properly map out where these incidents are taking place and get a real idea of the scale of the issue. Now, I know that this is a massive problem for local authorities. I believe it's Perth and Kinross Council have actually set up a fund to try and help some of the landowners in their particular area, because it is up to local authorities, if they wish to do that, to help the landowners in their area, then that's within their powers to do so. And I think initiatives like that are very important. But I think we're also considering to see what further action, if any, can be taken. And we intend to do that by working with COSLA, with SEPA and with Zero Waste Scotland. Again, that better national data will help us in any plans that we develop. And again, I would just encourage the reporting of these to the dumpers and the new litter monitoring system that we have, so we can truly get to grips with the scale of this problem and do what we can to try and tackle it.
I have 3 supplementary requests on this question, so could I ask that they be kept quite tight, please? Finlay Carson, followed by Willie Rennie.
We've heard that many land-based businesses have reported an increase in rubbish, but also in the rubbish being left by access takers, dirty campers, along with other acts of irresponsible access. Given that in January 2003, the Scottish Parliament passed the Land Reformed Act, which sets out statutory rights of access, have taken responsibility, will the Minister assure Parliament that she will take decisive action to address this unacceptable behaviour, which is destroying our beauty spots and frightening away tourists? And will she give serious consideration to the merits of assisting local authorities to employ additional countryside rangers, not only to help police irresponsible access, but assist in deterring wildlife crime and add value to the visitor experience in our wonderful natural environment?
Before the Cabinet Secretary responds, can I remind members that when I ask people to give quick supplementary questions and answers, it's because I'm trying to be fair to all members. I don't think it's fair to colleagues for people to use up all of that time. Marie Goujon.
Thank you, and I thank the member for those points that he made as well, because I would completely agree. I think I've been as disgusted as members right across the chamber will have been with some of the scenes that we've seen in our beauty spots. I mean, we live in such a beautiful country, and it's just absolutely shocking and quite disgusting to see it destroyed in that way by people being irresponsible, because that's what it's about. It's people, there are a few that are determined to destroy it for the rest of us. So I think it is vitally important. I know that there have been a number of issues here, and I think that we have to fully consider all the options that might be available to us to try and tackle that. But that's where I also think the review of the litter strategy will be vitally important into looking at, again, the scale of the problem and how we can begin to tackle it, because this is a serious issue that we do need to do something about.
Willie Rennie, followed by Neil Finlay.
The Minister has quite rightly cited Perth and Kinross Council for its special fund that's been set up. The cost of this fly tipper has been picked up often by private landowners and farmers. Would it be possible for the Government to set up a special central fund to be able to assist councils to make this happen right across the country?
Marie Goujon.
Again, this is something that, of course, the ultimate responsibility remains with local authorities and with private landowners. But that is where this is something that is going to take a multi-agency response. As I've discussed earlier, I'm working with all the different agencies to try and see what action we can take in an attempt to try and tackle that. But as of right now, that's where the responsibility lies. And again, Perth and Kinross, the example that Willie Rennie mentioned there, they've set up their own fund. And again, local authorities do have the powers to do that at the moment, and that's within their powers to do that.
Neil Finlay.
In a parliamentary answer, the government said they didn't know the annual amount that it costs to pick up litter or deal with fly tipping. The current maximum fine for both is £80 for litter and £200 for fly tipping. So can I ask the Minister if she will find out how much it costs on an annual basis to deal with these so the budget can reflect the problem? And will she look again at the level of fixed penalty notices and bring them up from the amount that they are to a more punitive level?
Marie Goujon.
I think that's where some of the issues that I talked about in my previous answers would be key to getting that information as well. It's about making sure that we have an idea of the full scale of the issues and that we can properly map that and get all that available data together. And again, it's about working with other agencies and really getting a holistic picture of what we're looking at here. And as I've also mentioned, looking at the litter strategy going forward. I think all of these will be pivotal in those discussions.
Question number 4 is Murdo Fraser joining us remotely. I've just been informed that I missed out John Mason. I'm terribly sorry. How could I do that? Question number 3, John Mason.
Very grateful, thank you, Presiding Officer. To ask the Scottish Government what action it is taking to prevent the persecution of raptors.
Marie Goujon.
Tackling wildlife crime and ending the senseless killing of our birds of prey is an absolute priority for the Scottish Government. And the recently passed Animals and Wildlife Penalties, Protections and Powers Act increases the maximum penalties for the most serious wildlife crimes, and that includes the illegal killing of birds of prey and the possession of banned pesticides to 5 years imprisonment and/or an unlimited fine. And with that, it gives Police Scotland more time to investigate these offences, because I know that can be a key issue. So really, with the action that we've taken through that act, that now reflects the seriousness, I think, of these crimes and how we view these crimes in Scotland, because they are an absolute affront to the people here, and we remain absolutely committed to consigning this type of crime to history.
John Mason.
I thank the Minister for that answer. I wonder if she would share my support for Hen Harrier Day, which was on the 8th of August, and would she share my concern that the population of hen harriers across the UK appears to have fallen by 24% since 2004, and that 72% of satellite-tagged hen harriers seem to have been killed on grouse moors, and that hen harriers are 10 times more likely to die or disappear over grouse moors compared to other locations?
Marie Goujon.
The member may or may not be aware, I'm the species champion for the hen harrier, so I absolutely support Hen Harrier Day. And again, like him, I'm just absolutely appalled to see their continued persecution. And when it comes to grouse moors, the member will also be aware that we commissioned the Werity review. And I know that the First Minister has previously said that our consideration of the Werity report on grouse moor management, that will involve looking at potentially licensing of grouse moors. And if we were to go down that route, I believe both the First Minister and the Cabinet Secretary for the Environment have stated that we would likely move faster than the 5-year period that had been suggested there. But I do also want to make absolutely clear now to anyone who has either carried out or even contemplating carrying out one of these absolutely despicable crimes against our birds of prey that we are watching and we're paying attention, because any criminal acts that are carried out now will be taken into account if and when we come to consider any licensing decisions in the future.
I have 2 supplementary requests here. Alison Johnson, followed by Alex Rowley.
Thank you. The problem of raptor persecution has been with us for all of the 20 years of devolution and a century and a half before that. Yet all that has changed is that the scale of killing has continued to increase. Is it not time for the Scottish Government to end the endless reviews and to ban the destructive activity of driven grouse shooting?
Marie Goujon.
As I just mentioned in my previous answer to John Mason, we did have the Werity review and we will be bringing forward our response to that. And I hope that the members across the chamber would understand. Obviously, we would have potentially hoped to have done that sooner, but given everything that the government has had to deal with over this past few months, that hasn't been possible. But I completely understand the anger that not just members across the chamber will have, but members of the public as well, because these crimes are absolutely abhorrent and they shouldn't be taking place. And we want to take all the action we can to try and, to prosecute the people who are carrying out these crimes. And I hope that the Animals and Wildlife Bill, I think, does go a huge step towards that. And the fact that we've now got that implemented, again, it just shows how seriously we are taking these crimes. But again, because of the nature of where they take place, It's the investigation of it which can be particularly difficult, and I think we want to try and tackle this as best we possibly can, and we will be bringing forward our response to the Werity report in the coming months.
Alex Rowley.
But the evidence, Presiding Officer, seems to be that the driven grouse moors that are where a lot of these birds have perished. Given the seriousness of this, given the outcry that there is from across Scotland, does the Minister not recognise that you need to start to set a date and let us know when you're going to make these decisions that I think the whole country is waiting on you making?
Marie Goujon.
Again, I completely understand the points that the member has made there. And again, that's why we took the time to undertake a review and to make those recommendations. And it has been something we are considering. But we will be coming forward again over the coming months to bring forward our response to the Werity review. But again, I would also highlight the other actions that we've taken and the other work that we've done to show just how seriously we take these crimes in Scotland and how serious we are about tackling them.
We'll now move to question number 4, and Murdo Fraser joining us remotely.
Thank you, Deputy Presiding Officer. Do you ask the Scottish Government for what reason source emissions rose 1.5% from 2017 to 2018?
Rosanna Cunningham.
As I've already reported to Parliament, changes to the national energy mix and freezing temperatures from the Beast from the East during the early months of 2018 contributed to a rise in emissions from energy supply and heating used for buildings. But to set that in context, emissions reductions were seen in all other sectors, including transport, industry and agriculture. These figures are from 2018 and predate a huge amount of work by this government to tackle climate change. Nonetheless, they already show Scotland's emissions down 50% since the 1990 baseline, which is halfway to net zero.
Murdo Fraser.
Can I thank the Cabinet Secretary for her response? The ambitious climate change targets that Parliament agreed to have widespread support, but one of the risks we have of the COVID-19 situation in relation to transport is that individuals may be more reluctant in the future to use public transport because of the risk of infection, which drives them back into private cars. Now, we've seen that the UK government introduced a number of initiatives to try and encourage greater use of cycling as an alternative. Can the Cabinet Secretary outline what the Scottish Government is doing to promote cycling?
Rosanna Cunningham.
On behalf of my colleague, who is the Cabinet Secretary for Transport, I would point out that over the period of the COVID emergency, significant sums of money were given to local authorities in order to allow them to put in place both walking and cycling routes in areas that they deemed to be the most appropriate. Those areas, I think, have been shown to be very successful, but the commitment, and I'm just thinking off the top of my head now of somewhere in the region of about £50 million to do that, was extremely important and was evidence of this government's intention and desire to have active transport be very much part of the mix. There is an issue about the use of transport now as a result of the COVID emergency. But we do know that. We are considering what can be done to achieve that. But the member will know very well that walking and cycling will probably not assist him in attending Parliament from where he lives. So there has to be more than just walking and cycling in the context of how to ensure that transport remains sustainable.
I have 2 supplementary requests. Gillian Martin, followed by Claudia Beamish. Gillian Martin.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. According to the Government's own figures, some of the highest proportions of source greenhouse gas emissions are from methane and nitrous oxide, and they're particularly associated with agriculture. Can the Cabinet Secretary outline what work has been done with the agricultural and land use sector to reduce methane and nitrous oxide emissions?
Rosanna Cunningham.
Agriculture is home to the majority of methane and nitrous oxide emissions in Scotland, and we are working with the industry and other stakeholders to identify and encourage practices that can reduce these, for example, through the advice provided by the Farm Advisory Service and Farming for a Better Climate, or the requirements of the Beef Efficiency Scheme. We also continue to look to the future and are increasing our understanding of methane-reducing feed additives and the potential for methane capture and reuse.
Claudia Beamish, joining us remotely.
Thank you, Deputy Presiding Officer. Can the Cabinet Secretary give an update on what new measures are recently in place to help us to contribute fairly and quickly in the early years towards our 2030 interim target, as we can't, as I'm sure she will agree, wait for the updated climate change plan for new actions?
Rosanna Cunningham.
Well, since the member is actively involved in the discussions that we are currently having, she knows that the work that is being done will be published in December. The government as a whole, however, is looking very carefully at how to allocate the £2 billion low carbon fund, which clearly will be impactful in respect of a number of areas. The point I think that I want to make is that these are not issues only for one portfolio. They are issues for all portfolios. All portfolios in the Scottish Government are looking very closely at them.
Question number 5, Joan McAlpine.
Thank you very much. To ask the Scottish Government whether it will provide an update on its plans to tackle climate change.
Rosanna Cunningham.
The update to our 2018 climate change plan will be published in December this year, as I think I've already indicated, and will set out a pathway to meeting Scotland's world-leading targets over the period to 2032. Although the update was previously due in April, the global pandemic means we were operating in a changed landscape. Our starting point has changed, but our ambitions have not, and we are committed to building a green recovery from COVID-19. The recast plan will draw upon the best available evidence, including advice from the UK Committee on Climate Change, the Advisory Group on Economic Recovery, the Just Transition Commission and the Sustainable Renewal Advisory Group.
Joan McAlpine.
Thank you. While emissions fell around the world at the height of lockdown, the use of private vehicles may increase as public transport is affected by the pandemic. Does this mean that the Government will need to revise its strategy for increasing the use of decarbonised vehicles, even though the Switched On Scotland Action Plan was welcome as extremely ambitious when it was launched in 2017?
Rosanna Cunningham.
Well, despite the impact of COVID-19, we do remain committed to the ambitious vision for Scotland's transport system set out in the National Transport Strategy 2. We continue to progress the switch to ultra-low emission vehicles since the Switched On Scotland Action Plan was launched in 2017. We've invested significantly in growing and developing the Charge Place Scotland EV charging network, such that it now has over 1,250 charge points across Scotland, and I think it's the most extensive in the UK. The pandemic poses many challenges, but we are committed to our ambitious emission reduction targets, and as part of this, to phasing out the need for petrol and diesel cars and vans by 2032, thereby delivering a healthier, cleaner and greener Scotland for generations to come.
I have 2 supplementary requests. May I request that they are brief? And that would be Mark Ruskell. Sorry, I think Rachel Hamilton first, followed by Mark Ruskell.
Cabinet Secretary, this week a landslide on the A68 connecting the borders to Edinburgh, alongside many other landslides on road and rail networks across Scotland, have caused heartache and severe disruption. Will the Cabinet Secretary commit to looking how deforestation contributes to water runoff and soil erosion, alongside a government investigation into how climate change may have contributed to the devastating impact of extreme weather patterns on Scotland's infrastructure?
Could I have a brief answer, please, Cabinet Secretary?
Well, the Transport Cabinet Secretary has already acknowledged the impact of climate change in respect of the events that took place in Stonehaven, and I will certainly undertake to discuss with my colleague, the Rural Economy Cabinet Secretary, some of the issues that are around deforestation. He is working incredibly hard, of course, to completely reverse deforestation.
Mark Ruskell.
Extreme weather clearly will only intensify in future because of climate change. So can I ask what climate adapt exists for major industrial sites such as Mossmoran, where a simple power dip due to the extreme weather is once again bringing flaring misery to surrounding communities this week?
I am aware of the situation at Mossmoran. The weather event that we have seen seems to be unprecedented, although I'm not a meteorological expert in any way, shape or form. SEPA is currently engaging very strongly with Mossmoran to ascertain exactly what happened, and I think that there is still a question mark over quite what has taken place there. So I think in those circumstances we might be best advised to wait for detailed information about the reality of the situation before we jump to any conclusions that are then rolled out and assumed for other areas as well.
I have 3 questions left in this portfolio section. I don't think I can take any more supplementaries, so can I have question number 6, please, from Joanne Lamont.
Thank you. To ask the Scottish Government what support is available to households in Glasgow to improve access to recycling.
Marie Goujon.
Local authorities are responsible for decisions on the provision of local waste services within the statutory framework that exists. And Zero Waste Scotland provides councils with advice and assistance to help support and improve recycling services. And they also provide information and tips on their website to help householders access recycling services to reduce waste and increase recycling.
Joanne Lamont.
Thank you. I want to refer back to a question that was asked earlier referred to by James Kelly, my colleague, because in Glasgow, fly tipping has increased since lockdown, with perhaps not access to recycling facilities. And week in, week out, we see stories in local papers highlighting instances of fly tipping right across Glasgow. This being condemned by councillors across parties. I wonder if the Minister understands that cuts year after year to Glasgow's budget means there is less money to fund much-needed services like these. What contact has the leader of Glasgow City Council had with the Minister to lobby for the resources Glasgow so desperately needs to support the frontline workers who have the difficult job of keeping Glasgow clean?
Marie Goujon.
I'm afraid I don't have that particular information. That's something that I would have to look at and get back to the member about. But again, as I would say in the previous responses that I'd given in relation to fly tipping, I absolutely understand how big a problem this is. And that's why it is going to require a multi-agency effort to look at that and in an attempt to try and tackle it. I mean, there are local authorities that are, again, we talked about Perth and Kinross Council earlier on, who had developed their own strategy and attempt to try and deal with some of the fly tipping issues that they'd seen there. And that's within the kind of powers that local authorities have. They have them to enable them to do that. But this is a problem that we are looking at and looking at what further can be done.
Question number 7, Liam MacArthur.
Thank you, Deputy Presiding Officer. To ask the Scottish Government what action it's taking to ensure that the country meets its targets set out in the Climate Change Emissions Reduction Targets Scotland Act 2019.
Rosanna
We're taking ambitious action across the board, including through investment and policy development. Our 2020-2021 budget included £2 billion of infrastructure investment over the next parliamentary term for measures to support delivery of our climate change plan. It commits £250 million over 10 years for peatland restoration and a record £53 million to forestry over 2020-2021. More recently, we committed £62 million to the Energy Transition Fund and £66 million for green recovery as part of our Return to Work package. In December, we will publish an update to our 2018 climate change plan to account for the targets in the 2019 Act and support a green recovery from COVID-19.
Liam MacArthur.
Can I thank the Cabinet Secretary for that response, but she'll be aware that reducing emissions from the transport sector is absolutely critical to Scotland achieving its climate change targets. This will require major investment in support for transmission to low emissions modes of transport. So will Rosanna Cunningham join me in urging the Transport Secretary to reach agreement with Orkney Islands Council on the replacement of Orkney's ageing internal ferry fleet with vessels that are more fuel efficient, thus helping reduce emissions, cutting costs and providing my constituents with the service that is fit for purpose?
Rosanna Cunningham.
I will ensure to pass the members' concerns to my colleague, the Transport Cabinet Secretary, in respect of the question about ferries, which he has just asked me.
Question number 8, Jeremy Balfour.
Thank you, Deputy Presiding Officer. To ask the Scottish Government whether it will provide an update on its creation of a nitrogen balance sheet.
Rosanna Cunningham.
Whilst we continue to respond to the COVID-19 crisis, we remain absolutely committed to our climate change goals. And this includes the establishment of a national nitrogen balance sheet to enhance the evidence base in areas such as air quality, agriculture and transport. Initial work to identify data sources is underway within Scottish Government. We expect to begin engaging stakeholders on the balance sheet later this year and to complete the legislative process to formalise it well in advance of the deadline agreed unanimously by Parliament of March 2022.
Jeremy Balfour.
Presiding Officer, there have been some delays that the public will understand as unavoidable because of this crisis. But the SNP have now given themselves 2 full years since the passage of the Climate Change Act to properly monitor nitrogen flows. Is it not the case that SNP ministers spotted another opportunity to dodge scrutiny and grasped it with both hands?
Rosanna Cunningham.
I'm assuming the unanimous endorsement of the Scottish Parliament of that delay included a vote from Jeremy Balfour. So I'm a little puzzled as to why he's continuing to press on this. The truth of the matter is that we needed to do. I mean, this is kind of quite important. Nitrogen is an important greenhouse gas. And the balance sheet will support national climate change targets. But the extension of the deadline for completing the regulatory process, the deadline was set prior to COVID-19. And we have agreed what I consider to be a pragmatic extension of the timeframe. The limited extension to the timeframe does allow us to do the proper work that will be required across stakeholder groups, and that will make sure that there is no risk to the quality of the balance sheet when we are able to produce it. I may say that, as far as I'm aware, Scotland is the only country in the world to have put that into law. While other countries do some balance sheet work in terms of nitrogen, Scotland is the only place to make it a statutory responsibility.
That concludes questions on environment, climate change and land reform. And we now move on to portfolio questions on rural economy and tourism. Question number 1 was not lodged. Question number 2, Graham Simpson.
To ask the Scottish Government what assessment it has made of the impact of the Eat Out to Help Out scheme on the rural and tourism economies in Scotland.
Fergus Ewing.
Presiding Officer, Eat Out to Help Out is the UK Government scheme run by HMRC, which is running every Monday, Tuesday and Wednesday between the 3rd and the 31st of this month. We do not currently have information on the number of businesses which have signed up to the scheme, nor the number of times it has been used in Scotland.
Graham Simpson.
Well, can I thank the Cabinet Secretary for that rather disappointing answer. I can tell him that there were 3,766 Scottish restaurants signed up to the scheme when it went live on the 3rd of August. So would he agree that this fantastic UK-wide initiative is having a major impact in Scotland?
Fergus Ewing.
Well, we recognise that the scheme is making a contribution. As to whether it's going to be a major contribution, I would just caution the member to be a bit cautious. This morning, I spoke to 3 leading hoteliers in Scotland. They say that unless the furlough scheme is extended beyond October, or there is an alternative job support package, then the resultant number of people who will face redundancy across Britain will be devastating. So yes, I am never churlish. I welcome any support, but to say that this is a major scheme, as the member has done, I think is really to fly in the face of what industry is actually saying and what employees are fearing.
Short supplementary, please, from Claire Baker.
Thank you. It's estimated that music tourism generates around £300 million for the Scottish economy each year, and some music venues have diversified into providing seated restaurants during this period. While they are being supported by the UK Government scheme, the new hospitality guidance bans the playing of background...
Could you get your question, please, Ms Baker?
The new guidance bans the playing of background music. Can the Scottish Government respond to concerns that this approach is too restrictive and that consideration should be given
Ms Baker, I think that's enough. I did ask for short supplementaries.
Presiding Officer, it's an important issue that it's a struggle to get raised in Chamber. I have 5 words left to speak if that would be possible. Could it be a specifying a noise level for background music that prevent people from raising their voices?
Fergus Ewing.
Well, of course, I sympathise with the point the member makes. I actually studied this, as it happens, earlier this morning, and I am acutely aware that performers in particular who made their living, artists who are out of performance, have really suffered. And that's why I'm delighted that Fiona Hislop is providing assistance to the arts sector in Scotland that will really help a number of people who have made their livelihood from this source of living. So far as background music is concerned, I think we have to be very, very careful. If you have music and noise in a pub, then what happens is that people talk more loudly. As they talk more loudly, I'm afraid the propensity to spread the virus increases. That, in short, is the problem we have. And I think across the Chamber there is recognition that the approach this government has taken is sensible, a cautious approach. I think for the time being, although I sympathise absolutely with the points the member makes, caution should be our watchword.
Can I say to members, I'm trying to be very fair here and allow everybody to get in with an opportunity to ask a question. People are choosing to disadvantage their colleagues, and I would ask them to think on that. Can I call, please, question number 3, David Stewart.
Thank you, Presiding Officer, to ask the Scottish Government what representations it has received regarding future development of the NC 500.
Fergus Ewing.
The Scottish Government, through its agencies, continues to support businesses and communities along the route. This includes engagement with HIE with a number of community organisations around the NC 500 area. Areas along the route have already benefited from the Rural Tourism Infrastructure Fund through, for example, new parking and viewpoints at Loch Carron and motorhome facilities at Loch Inver.
David Stewart.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. Does the Cabinet Secretary share my view that the NC 500 is the goose that lays the golden eggs for the Highland tourist economy? And finally, does Mr Ewing accept a positive call from North businesses to set up a growth fund to help a bounce back from the COVID-19 pandemic?
Fergus Ewing.
Yes, I think the NC 500 has been a great success, but there are pressures and we need to deal with them. And that's why the Rural Tourism Infrastructure Fund is, I think, the right vehicle for that. But I'm very happy to discuss with Mr Stewart, who I know has been an advocate and long-standing supporter of the route, how we can further develop it and increase the benefits to businesses and communities along the length of the route.
Question number 4, David Torrance.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. To ask the Scottish Government what importance it places on the role and contribution of show people and fun fair operators to tourism.
Ferguson.
We recognise the significant and long-standing heritage of Scotland's show people and fun fair operators. They form an important and valued part of our tourism sector, as well as bringing fun and enjoyment to communities across the country. I know the pandemic has hit our fun fairs extremely hard, and I'm pleased that we now have an indicative date for fun fairs and show people to resume business, provided, of course, it is safe to do so. We shouldn't prejudge these matters.
David Torrance.
I thank the Cabinet Secretary for that answer. The Cabinet Secretary will be aware that a number of Scottish Showmen's Guild members have been ineligible for financial support during this crisis. Can the Cabinet Secretary provide reassurance that his government is committed to working with the sector to ensure a safe reopening of fun fairs as quickly as possible and look at financial support for showmen and their families who so far have been left with no income?
Ferguson.
Well, of course we will, and of course we shall. As with all sectors, we do not want restrictions to remain in place any longer than absolutely necessary to protect public health and continue to make progress in suppressing the virus. So I can absolutely assure the member we are seeking to ensure the safe reopening of fun fairs as quickly as is safe to do.
Question number 5 was not lodged. Question number 6, Alistair Allen.
To ask the Scottish Government how it will ensure that the post-lockdown economy in rural communities benefits from but does not become overly dependent on tourism.
Fergus Ewing.
Well, we acknowledge that tourism plays a key part in rural economies. In addition to our £2.3 billion package of measures to support business, we are working with local authority partners and the UK Government to support a wide range of economic development projects that will harness local and regional strengths to create jobs and attract investment.
Alistair Allen.
I thank the Cabinet Secretary for his response. He will be aware that the future of islands depends on there being a mixed economy of which tourism is a vital part. Will he agree that we need to grow our tourist economy as part of a wider package of measures which ensures the development of the housing and infrastructure on which both tourists and other businesses depend?
Fergus Ewing.
Yes, I do agree with Dr Allen, and he has been a champion of, for example, the Crofting Grant Scheme, which has enabled during the lifetime of this party's period in government us to provide 1,000 families new homes through the Crofting Grant Scheme. A really significant creation. Thanks to Dr Allen's representations, that is continuing. And we also recognise, through our National Islands Plan, the necessity of a thriving business environment that allows individuals in Dr Allen's constituency to pursue a wide range of economic opportunities.
Question number 7, Emma Harper.
To ask the Scottish Government what support it is providing to tourism businesses involved in the organising, planning and hosting of weddings in Dumfries and Galloway and other rural economies that are reliant on the wedding industry.
Ferguson.
We know how challenging the position of weddings and events has been, both for couples who plan to get married this spring and summer, Presiding Officer, and for hospitality businesses largely dependent upon weddings. Our package of support for business overall totals £2.3 billion. Many events-related businesses will have been able to access some of these funds, including some of those affected by the inability to host wedding receptions, for example. Our aim, of course, is to try to get the sector reopened as soon as it is safe to do so. And I would emphasise the necessity of all hospitality premises continuing to observe the COVID rules and not to let their guard down.
Emma Harper.
I thank the Cabinet Secretary for that response. I have written to the First Minister and the Cabinet Secretary following contact from several constituency businesses in Galloway. Could the Cabinet Secretary provide assurances that he will continue to engage with key stakeholders so that these stakeholder experts can input their best practice ideas in order to safely prepare their businesses for the future?
Yes, I'm happy to do so, Presiding Officer. Thank you. And I can confirm that I have actually been in contact quite regularly with individual businesses who have been most affected, particularly in the Gretna area, which is substantially reliant on hosting weddings and wedding receptions and everything else relating thereto. One of the individuals in business who is most prominent also serves in our tourism task force and is therefore directly able to input his recommendations as to that. Above all, we have to keep the restrictions in place until it's safe to do so. Everybody knows that, but at the same time, we all do want to see an indicative date provided for resumption of weddings, which are planned, obviously, on a long-term basis, and therefore the sooner that can be provided in accordance with the safety protocols, the better for those businesses.
I have a few supplementary requests for this, so please keep them short. First of all, Colin Smith.
Thank you, President Officer. The wedding sector is hugely important to the Dumfries and Galloway economy, not least, of course, in Gretna Green, as the Cabinet Secretary mentioned. But does he accept that what the sector are asking for is no different from what he did for tourism, namely to set that indicative advance date for full reopening? Because whether you're a couple looking to tie the knot or a business making that day special, advanced planning time is absolutely crucial.
Fergus Ewing.
Well, I do absolutely understand what the sector wishes, and that's precisely because I have, as I indicated in my response to Emma Harper, engaged directly with the businesses concerned. In one case, I think, in the discussion for 45 minutes. I know well that they want to reopen. I think members will be aware that the difference between a group of strangers in a restaurant and a group or party at a wedding is that a wedding party, everybody knows each other, and therefore that is a different social gathering. It is a different context. Like it or not, we can't ignore that, and we can't ignore the concomitant additional risks that it causes. Now, that is the reason why we had to come to the decision not to group the wedding reception category in the same category as the other categories which have had the restrictions lifted. That's the approach we've taken consistently here. I think down south they had decided to take a different approach, but they then decided to change their mind on that, if I'm not mistaken. Nonetheless, we all wish to see the resumption as soon as it is safe to do so. I make no bones about repeating that position. Every member knows that it is true.
Oliver Mundell.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. I imagine it's my constituents who've been on the phone to the Cabinet Secretary, and maybe if he'd listened to their expert advice, he wouldn't have been on the phone for 45 minutes. If these venues feel they can deliver weddings safely, why are we not trusting people and respecting industry experts?
Secretary.
Well, actually, I'm afraid I just don't accept the premises of the question. I think we have shown that we trust people, and the vast majority of businesses, and I've attended a great many since the 15th of July in the accommodation and visitor attraction sector, are taking this absolutely seriously, scrupulously seriously. So we are trusting them, and we are asking them to maintain high standards. And I most certainly trust the individuals that I don't want to mention names, the individuals that I think Mr Mundell is talking about having significant businesses in Gretna. Of course I do. That's not the issue. The issue is that wedding gatherings are different from gatherings of strangers. And that is, sadly, it gives me no pleasure to say this, but we have to be quite honest with people. That is what the First Minister has said all along. We can't retreat into sort of partisan political viewpoints just because it makes us feel good to utter them. It makes no difference whatsoever to the facts, which we have to look at straight in the eye and act upon.
And question number 8, Alex Rowley.
Officer, to ask the Scottish Government what the impact of COVID-19 has been on the availability of workers in the rural economy and tourism sectors.
Marie Goujon.
COVID-19 has had serious impacts on our rural and island economies and on tourism particularly, and we're continuing to monitor the impacts on agricultural, forestry, tourism and other industries which are predominant in these areas and particularly reliant on workers from the EU. And this situation continues to develop as communities are still affected by restrictions. So therefore, it's too early to fully assess the impact that will have had. However, the Scottish Tourism Recovery Task Force has a particular focus on business recovery and protecting the workforce through retaining and upskilling staff, and it will examine issues such as the availability of workers.
Alex Rowley.
Thank the Minister for that answer. I'm assuming that the Scottish Government believes that the rural economy has a major contribution to make in Scotland's economic recovery that we need to be building on. If that is the case, is it the intention of the Minister or the Government to bring forward a strategic plan for prioritising investment into the rural economy? So in forestry, for example, there can be thousands of jobs achieved if we invest in the levels of tree planting that we need to invest in order to hit our climate goals. Will the Government bring forward a plan for strategic investment in the rural economy?
Marie Goujon.
I thank the member for the question. I mean, he talked forestry there in particular, and that's an area of work that the Cabinet Secretary has been leading on and doing a tremendous amount of work, because there are areas like that where there is a huge potential for growth. And obviously, the rural economy is absolutely vital. So it is, of course, vitally important that we invest in these areas. And also, I mean, I've also mentioned in my previous response about the Tourism Recovery Task Force and looking at the I mentioned the few streams of work that will be considered, then exactly how we look to rebuild and develop and grow that industry too. So there are a number of plans underway because, again, the rural economy is absolutely vital and we want it to be in as strong a position as possible.
That concludes questions on rural economy and tourism. I'm sorry I was unable to take supplementaries to Mr Rowley's last question there. We'll move on to the next item of business.